Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of 100 Sisters on Security, where our guests speak on different areas of human security and defense as it pertains to and impacts women. We are brought to you by the Ontario chapter of the G100 Security and Defense Wing, and I am Allison Lamb, the Ontario chair. Before we begin, I'd like to invite everyone to take a moment to consider the traditional lands they're on. I am currently on Treaty 13 lands. They're the territories traditionally stewarded by the Wendat peoples, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Thousands of Indigenous people, many of whom were volunteers, served in the Canadian military forces in the First World War and the Second World War. And these were only those who identified themselves as such. It is believed that thousands more served our country without ever having revealed their Indigenous heritage. It wasn't until 2003 that their contributions were officially recognized with an offer of apology and compensation. This is Remembrance Day, and on this edition of 100 Sisters on Security, we are extremely fortunate to have Eva Martinez with us. Eva is the recipient of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee Medal for her contributions to the province of Nova Scotia. She has had a stellar career with the Royal Canadian Air Force, for which she was awarded the Canadian Forces Decoration Medal for 12 years of excellent conduct and service. She also represented Canada as a military observer on a peacekeeping mission to Guatemala and invited by the Chilean Air Force Commander to discuss the integration of women into the Chilean Air Force. Thank you so much for joining us today, Eva.
Thank you for having me.
So you graduated from the Royal Military College of Canada in 1993. There are a lot of beliefs and misconceptions about young women in military school. You're also a strong advocate for STEM learning for young women and girls. What was it like to be a woman in the RMCC and studying engineering as well? What made you decide to go there?
Yeah, my time at the Royal Military College was a great experience overall, but it was very challenging. And it's not the sort of environment that's right for everyone. It's not for the faint of heart. Personally, I had been an air cadet as a teenager, so I'd kind of gotten a taste of what a paramilitary organization might be like, and I was doing extremely well in that program. So heading off to RMC, I was pretty confident in my abilities and my potential. And I think that helped in some ways, but it was also a bit of a hindrance. And I'll gladly admit that there were some pretty horrible days at RMC for different reasons and throughout different points in time. As I said, the program is very demanding, everything from academics to military discipline, the physically demanding aspects of it. Then also, of course, the gender issues around discrimination and harassment. So, all of that over the course of 4 years, you're bound to, hit some bumpy times. I'd like to believe that, nowadays the cadet experience is considerably different, but those pillars that the Royal Military College really represents are still fundamentally there. And I think that they do definitely shape the experience. And it's really what makes RMC a very different university environment than any other civilian university would be. And yeah, I did choose engineering. I knew that I wanted to be academically challenged. Of course, at the time, I didn't sort of understand that you really had to balance your time and your efforts across a lot of other aspects of a university experience besides the academics. Mm-hmm. But in high school, I mean, I'd always done very well in math and sciences. They came easily to me. Of course, those were much harder topics and subjects to pursue in university. And at one point, I remember, it was just not going well. And I was thinking maybe I should just switch to an English degree. And but that said, I'm grateful that I pushed through those dark days. And yeah, I graduated with a degree in engineering management. And as you know, I am a huge proponent of young girls and women in STEM. And I do believe that the key is to encourage young girls to be able to make the right academic choices that leave doors open for them. If a student drops out of prerequisite courses like math and science in high school, it becomes very difficult. Those doors end up closing. And so if you decide later on in life that you're going to pursue engineering or other STEM degrees, and you don't have those fundamental courses, it does become that much harder, of course. And I think, just in terms of the messaging, whether it's through different organizations that support STEM for women, I think we need to stop perpetuating the narrative that, boys are better at math than girls. And we need to start to see gender parity both in education as well as in careers that are related to STEM.
Did you find that there were support communities in RMC for women and girls, particularly maybe in STEM?
No, not at the time. There really wasn't. I don't think there was really an appreciation for what made that sort of cadet experience, a gender issue. We were all sort of treated one and the same, and of course that brings up, that brings about a lot of challenges for those that are trying to, to fit. And we were very, very small in number, probably less than 10% at the time that I went through RMC were women. So yeah, having dedicated support networks really wasn't seen as necessary or even, I don't know, what the college's position was at the time, but they didn't seem to be hot topics, or, there didn't really seem to be a need for them. So I don't recall there being programs like that in the past. I know now at RMC that there are much more support groups that are specific. And I think that's a great move, because the last thing you want is to feel like you're alone in tackling some of these challenges. And I think that those organizations and those support groups help those that may be struggling with different aspects of that experience.
Thank you very much. So you joined the Royal Canadian Air Force in 1989 and retired as a major in 2002. There are frequently stories of gender inequities and sexual misconduct surrounding the armed forces, perhaps adding a barrier to young women joining. For example, though he was eventually acquitted, the charges of sexual assault against Major General Danny Fortin cast a large shadow over the Canadian Army. Will you please speak to your own experiences serving the country? Was it a challenge as a woman? And what would you say to young women considering joining today?
Yeah, unfortunately, there have been several stories besides Danny Fortin's that have cast a shadow over the military. I think we're in a position now where we know so much more today than we ever did before, and I think it's important that we continue to normalize conversations around gender, diversity, inclusion, barriers, just generally safe workplaces. Those are happening in industry as much as they're happening in the military. And I think nowadays, we have access to so much more information and resources, whether it's in person or online. So when I joined the military in 1989, I didn't have a sense of issues like diversity or sexual misconduct. Those weren't labels that I recognized or, didn't even really know how they fit into the decisions that I was making. What I saw was that there weren't a lot of women in the military, but I didn't think it was because there were barriers. I really just thought that these were roles that just didn't appeal to most women in the way that they appealed to me. So that I just kind of dismissed that. And, now looking back after spending 13 years in the military and now 21 years in the aerospace and defense sector as a civilian, I feel like I can look back and see that really I was navigating rather blindly through a minefield, and that there was so much I just didn't know about. Basically flying by the seat of my pants and, just taking everything, sort of one day at a time. And I didn't know, some of the things that were happening to me or around me. I didn't know whether they were considered acceptable or maybe not. Didn't even know how to have those kinds of conversations because, I didn't know who I could trust to talk about the things that were happening to me or even around me. And even with the other female students, I think there was a reluctance to open up about the things that we might be experiencing because, I mean, it's such a highly competitive environment, and you feel like there are going to be consequences. And if you talk about these things, then it could put you at a disadvantage. We might be seen as weak, or that we're not able to handle ourselves. We might even be seen as a rat if we, disclose what someone has done to us. We were kind of conditioned to keep a lot of things quiet for fear of what those consequences might be. Now here we are years since graduation. I just went back to Kingston earlier this year for my 30-year reunion. And my classmates and we're still revealing things about our time at RMC that we couldn't unpack at the time. We couldn't deal with them at the time. And so these are things that we're, in adulthood now, and with, now that most of us are parents as well, these are conversations that we're able to have. We're able to talk more openly about what we possibly endured. So I think that's a good thing, and hopefully that starts to continue to shift things for the military. And it's no secret. I mean, the military these days is certainly experiencing a lot of issues with recruitment and retention. We're seeing personnel shortfalls in astronomical numbers across all trades and occupations, and really, like, that just puts the protection of Canada at risk. And I'm by no means an expert, but my sense is that beyond gender, that there are a lot of issues that are plaguing the military in this day and age. We've always said that the Canadian military, Canadian Armed Forces, is meant to be a cross section of society. It's supposed to be a representation of what Canadian society is. And I think that we need to continue keeping that in mind as they adapt recruiting efforts, as society evolves, making sure that we're still attracting good people, and of course, just making sure that we've got the systems and the policies and procedures in place that are not only designed to attract people, but also to retain that talent once Canada has invested in their training, to make sure that they can support the Canadian Armed Forces. My advice for women today, it's funny, I often get people that say, oh, my daughter's considering joining the military, or wants to go to RMC, what would you say to them? And my first question is that something they want, or is that something that you want? But I think the biggest message is to not be naive. Be smart and always have situational awareness, and learning to trust your intuition, because that gut feel normally is it's there to tell you something. And also knowing what resources are in place, where can you turn, or who can you talk to if something does happen. And that includes, being able to talk to family and friends, or, professionals that are in, the mental health space, whether they're within the military or outside of the military, just knowing that you have those resources that you can turn to when something doesn't feel right. And just talk about them, because you don't get an opportunity to kind of review all the rules of what can and can't happen, and sometimes you kind of get caught in that unknown. So just that naivete can really be a peril.
Well, speaking of attracting talent and recruitment, you've mentioned before that the most enjoyable time during your military career had been working as the Deputy Squadron Aircraft Maintenance Engineer Officer at 413 Transport and Rescue Squadron in Nova Scotia. If I had to venture a guess, I would suggest that might be because you were able to combine serving the country with your love of aerospace engineering. Would you please tell us about the work of the squadron and your role?
Absolutely. Search and rescue is just one of the most compelling ways that the military supports Canada. So while I was at 413 Squadron, we conducted hundreds of missions searching for people in distress or in danger, over land or over water. And yeah, the squadron made use of a fleet of Hercules fixed-wing aircraft and Labrador tandem rotor helicopters to render these people in distress to safety or to recover them in, unfortunate circumstances. So, it's important work. It's good work. And, more often than not, these calls are generally occurring during inclement weather, less than ideal conditions. So it's dangerous work too. As an aircraft maintenance engineering officer, the importance of having serviceable aircraft is, it's just crucial. The fleet has to be ready to go at a moment's notice to what is usually a very, very tight timeline. And the motto of search and rescue is that others may live. So, being a part of that aircraft maintenance section at the squadron was something that I definitely put my heart and soul into. The aircraft maintenance technicians that I oversaw in that role were, as much family as they were employees, as they were service members to the country. So it was really a very much of a family feel, and knowing that we were doing incredibly important work for the country. And I think there are pockets of the population who struggle to get behind the idea of Canada needing an armed forces and the whole notion of war fighting, especially as we, for the most part, live in times of peace. But I think there's a different perception when it comes to search and rescue and the civic humanitarian efforts that the military is often called to do, whether it's ice storms or flooding or wildfires. So I think in general, there is a soft spot for search and rescue that not only I hold in my heart, but the general public as well. So doing work like that, work where my values and my passions align, is really what motivated me to continue my career in aerospace and defense after leaving the military. And where I am today at Blue Drop Training and Simulation, one of many things that we do is we design and build training solutions like high fidelity virtual reality simulators, where we use that technology to give soldiers, airmen and women, sailors, the opportunity to rehearse dangerous operations like hoisting and winching. And we're doing it in an environment that's safe. It doesn't have the same operational risk or the high cost of taking an actual aircraft or a ship out for that training. So that still for me is a motivator in the work that I do today.
Thank you. So Disarmament Week was the last week of October. You were a military observer for the United Nations, the only female, called to verify the ceasefire between the Guatemalan National Revolutionary Unit and the Guatemalan Army. Would you tell us about your experience? How important is the presence of women in discussions on disarmament?
Yeah, that was, I think, definitely the highlight of my career in the military. When I was at 413 Squadron, I got a call quite out of the blue that I'd been selected to be part of the international contingent of United Nations military observers that were going to be deploying to Guatemala to oversee the ceasefire as part of the Accord of Firm and Lasting Peace. So it came out of the blue because I'd never indicated an interest in participating in a UN mission, but it turns out that I was selected because I speak Spanish, and the UN had declared the language of operation for this mission as Spanish. So a tremendous opportunity for me personally and professionally. And yeah, it gave me the opportunity to be Canada's first female military observer, as well as the world's first female United Nations military observer for a mission in Latin America. So that's my claim to fame.
That's amazing.
As for the mission itself, I was in fact the only female military observer. Although we did have civilians and other entities that were supporting the mission, but not as military observers. And I think this really opened my eyes to the reality that by and large, we live in a world that's designed by men for men. So everything from my uniforms to sleeping arrangements to bathrooms, and then the challenges of having to deal with prejudices and preconceived notions that women shouldn't be allowed to drive, or that, women should be staying back at the camp to do the cooking and the cleaning. Those all, really were challenges that I wasn't anticipating, but obviously had to deal with. And, where I went into that mission thinking that, my interactions with the Army and the URNG guerrillas was going to be the dangerous part, those turned out to be, those turned out to pale in comparison to what I, sort of had to deal with from a mission logistical perspective. It was quite something. But you're right. I mean, the UN is recognizing more and more that women in peacekeeping means more peace. And they've put a lot of effort into campaigns of that nature, trying to increase the involvement of women in order to have more effective peace operations around the world. So in all fields of peacekeeping, women have over time proven that they can perform the same roles to the same standards and under the same difficult conditions as their male counterparts. So it is absolutely an operational imperative that we continue to recruit and retain female peacekeepers as part of the global effort. Certainly at the time that I went to Guatemala, I think women made up 1% of the total deployed uniformed personnel around the world. And today that number is not a whole lot higher. I think it's probably around 5%. They are targeting 15% for 2028. And again, the messaging is that women peacekeepers improve overall peacekeeping performance. We have greater access to communities. We're able to help promote human rights and the protection of civilians, and in turn, encouraging women to be part of, to be contributing in meaningful ways to peace and the political processes in their countries.
Is there anything we can do to overcome that barrier? Because it seems like it's very slow growth.
It is slow, and I think the UN and several other not-for-profit organizations are really just trying to get the message out. Social media is an important aspect, an important vehicle for that. With Peacekeeping 75, one of Canada's initiatives. Again, it's trying to raise awareness of Canada's role in peacekeeping over time, and the contributions of celebrating the contributions of the men as well as the women that have contributed to that.
So it's good that you mentioned Peacekeeping 75, because when I requested this interview, you mentioned Canada's 75-year history with UN peacekeeping. You've been involved in UN peacekeeping and the Canadian Armed Forces. You've represented Canada in peace missions and NATO training programs in Guatemala and Chile. If you were still part of the Air Force today, what would your thoughts be on the Israel-Gaza conflict? What role could Canada play in this global crisis?
The PK 75 is Peacekeeping 75. It recognizes the very first UN mission, which dates back to 1948. And PK 75 looks to recognize and celebrate the contributions of, there have been over 130,000 Canadians to date who have participated in multinational peacekeeping missions around the world. So this is where we, this initiative is important work. They've put together a beautiful anthology that's available online, and a time to also honor the 140 Canadian peacekeepers who have since died or were killed during our 75-year history of peacekeeping. Peacekeeping is a complex and multifaceted endeavor. Certainly what we're seeing in the news these days with the Israeli-Hamas conflict, the road to peace is never linear or sequential. And as we've seen over the decades, there have been multiple efforts, I think with the best of intentions, that have just been plagued by, so many factors, of course, politics being one of them. So From my short time with the UN, one of the takeaways for me is the first basic principle of peacekeeping, and how the UN helps countries navigate that very difficult path from conflict to peace. And that principle is consent of the parties. And so you need to have consent by the warring sides around topics like ceasefires and separation of forces, and then welcoming peacekeepers into the area to do their work. So the parties need to be able to reach an agreement, and as we continue to see from the news coverage, that simply isn't something that's happening in this particular conflict. And I certainly don't have the answers. I know that those that have this in their wheelhouse are, putting all their efforts into trying to move this in the right direction. Ultimately, it'll be up to the UN Security Council to approve a legally binding mission and invite member nations to support the effort, whatever that looks like. But in order to get to that point, it's very protracted, it takes a long time, very political process. And unless there is the consent of those parties involved, it really, you can't force it. So I guess for now, we wait to see, what the General Assembly is doing in trying to address, sort of the more critical issues of the humanitarian relief efforts, and making sure that they can get to where they're destined without any hindrances. So yeah, if I were in the military today, it's interesting. I don't know how I would feel about what's happening around us, around this conflict. Yeah, just have to trust the process, I suppose.
I find it it's really important what you mentioned about consent of the parties, because I think that's not often stressed enough. Because as an individual, as a peacekeeper, if there's reluctant consent among the parties, and then you're sent in as a peacekeeper, that must cause a lot of trepidation.
Absolutely. And that was one of the reasons why the UN mission in Guatemala was as successful as it was, because there was consent by the Guatemalan government and the army with the URNG, and they had agreed to they negotiated what that accord was going to look like, what the conditions of the ceasefire were going to be, and there was consent on both sides. It was also an opportunity for the URNG to continue not as a warring faction of guerrillas, but rather as a political party, which exists to this day. But yeah, there has to be consent on both sides, and sometimes it takes getting to the worst case scenarios before they start to finally see that the way that they're tackling the conflict simply isn't benefiting anybody. It's certainly not getting them the it's not helping them reach their goals. So it is unfortunately very time dependent.
Well, thank you very much for that. That's all the questions we have for today. I'm not sure if you had any last words that you would like to share, any final thoughts?
No, I thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for recognizing the importance of Remembrance Day. We've had hundreds of thousands that have given the ultimate sacrifice for the peace that we enjoy today. And it is important that we recognize them and not forget.
Well, thank you for speaking with us today, for sharing your thoughts and your experiences, and giving us this opportunity to learn from you. So this has been an incredible edition of 100 Sisters on Security, and I hope our viewers will join us next time.